Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe they can do what they want, when they want, because they're better than you. And in today's episode, we're dealing with lazy, entitled Karen workers. We've got people getting fired, committing felonies, thinking they're better than their own bosses. Oh boy. So if you've ever worked with a lazy, useless worker, you're gonna love this one. I hope you enjoy the stories, don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So about 12 years ago, I worked in security for a high-end resort. It was a small group, and the head of security was a retired police sergeant. The guy was actually pretty cool, and he had a really strong sense of right and wrong. That said, I'm a type 1 diabetic. We had a fridge in the back, so I would buy things like juice and snacks to keep my sugar from bottoming out, since I was walking 5 to 6 miles per shift. One day, my juice disappears. I replaced it, and the same thing happened again. I got another, and I wrote on it, "Please do not take. I'm diabetic." And wouldn't you know, it disappears again. We all had an idea who it was, but we couldn't ever catch him. Until one day, I walked in and I saw the first shift guy making a meal out of my food. I asked him point blank what he was doing eating my food, and the guy said, "That's what you get for being late." I checked the clock and I was 2 minutes late. The guy even took food out of my locker and he was snacking on my glucose tabs because they taste like candy. Somehow, the head of the department found out what he said, and he called me in the office to ask me about it. It seems this dude's been stealing food from the fridge since he started there. And while people weren't happy about it, they were willing to let it go since a lot of people brought food in and thought of it as community property. Well, this didn't apply to me because they viewed my food as medically necessary. And this was the first time he went into someone's locker. My boss said this would be handled and then dismissed me. When I came in for my next shift, all of this guy's stuff was gone and his locker was empty. My mom also worked there at the time, and I found out through her that because the guy served in Iraq, he felt like everyone owed him everything. He would constantly come in late to work, pawn his work off on other people, and was the only one who didn't contribute to the fridge. The guy would spend his time browsing the internet on the office computer. I ran into him about 6 months after he was let go, while I was doing my laundry. And right as I was approaching one of the washers, the guy jumps right in front of me and he took it. This guy might be the most entitled piece of crap at work and outside of work that I've ever encountered. You know, I've read so many posts about food thieves, guys, and it literally makes me shake my head every single time. Like, why? Clearly, this dude had a mega superiority complex, all because he served, and I think everyone can agree, thank you for your service, but stop acting all high and mighty at work like everyone owes you, and stop stealing people's food, especially something that's labeled and says, "I'm diabetic" on it. This isn't the place. But yeah, clearly no lessons were learned though. This guy's gonna be entitled forever. So I'm a 34-year-old female and I work retail. A few years ago, I had a coworker who was by far the most entitled yet troubled person I've ever met. And I don't like calling people crazy, but oh my lord, did this girl take the cake. Let's call her Betty because why not? Now Betty, who is 38 years old, would seem really cool at times. But as you start talking to her more, you'd realize that she would barely listen to anything about anyone else, just waiting for her turn to incessantly talk about herself. Now, not only would she talk about herself, but you could tell that she wasn't telling the truth, and she was making things up for attention. She would say stuff like, "My dad bought me this, my uncle bought me this, oh, my dad pays for everything, we went on vacation here, blah blah blah." That kind of stuff, with nothing to show for it. Some of the things that Betty would make up were relatively harmless, but then she would openly trauma dump on us at our job for attention without warning, which would trigger a lot of other employees, myself included. That all said, not only was Betty lazy and picky and choosy about what tasks she would do, she was also terrible at the job. Which our job isn't rocket science, it's customer service. I would always try to gently point her in the right direction and tell her how to properly do things, and she would get upset with me and she would cry. Sometimes she would even throw tantrums, but here's the thing, she would never go in private to cry. She would literally stop wherever she was, and she would start hysterically crying in front of customers. One day, I asked her at the end of the night to continue helping us close because she was staring aimlessly at the wall. She would often do this on purpose so that everyone else would do the work so she could just coast. She then looked at me as if I stabbed her mom or something. The next day, I found out that she told our manager that I was being mean to her and bossing her around and to reprimand me. I was so over it. At that point, I've been working my job for almost a decade, and I've never had problems with anyone. Also, I live by the rule that once you tattle, I'm done with you. I went low contact. If I absolutely had to talk to her about work, I would. But if Betty tried to talk to me about anything personal or anything that didn't have anything to do with the job, I would simply walk away and not respond. So once I stopped responding to Betty, she would get so upset. She would call me mean and abusive, all because I wasn't responding to her. She had painted me as a bully to my boss and everyone else, even going as far as to try to have me demoted and stripped of my supervisor position. One day, I found out from a coworker that she said that she would love to punch me in the face and break my nose. When I found this out, I was more angry than anything. So out of anger, I used her tactic. I cried to my other boss about what happened. Even though my tears were purely anger, I sort of played the victim card. I didn't want to work with this woman, and most of my coworkers didn't want to either. She was sent home for the day and suspended. Then after that, they changed her schedule, so that I would only have to work with her 1 day a week. After the other team had to work with her more, they realized what I'd been talking about, and she ends up being fired. But not before throwing another tantrum in the store and being escorted off the premises by law enforcement. This happened a few years ago, and I still think about her. I'm so glad she's out of my life. Yeah, why am I not surprised that she didn't leave without kicking and screaming and cops being involved? But I am, however, surprised at the fact that people like Betty managed to stay in positions for that long before anything's done about it. And it's not like it was a one-off thing. Like, Betty was lazy, she was bad at her job, she cried and threw tantrums in front of customers, and managers still didn't do anything. Again, I don't know how she got away with it, because if an employee's hired and they don't perform their duties, that's grounds to be let go as soon as possible, right? And guys, the OP in the next post talks about the time their coworker's plan backfired so hard. So I work at a nursing home as a QMAP, which stands for Qualified Medication Assistant Personnel. We're super short-staffed, so for my first 2 weeks of employment, I had to work 7 days a week because there was no other night shift QMAP. Finally, we hire a new person who we'll call Devin. Now, Devin was absolutely useless. I mean, genuinely, truly, wholly useless. Not to mention, he was a bit stuck up and entitled. The only duty he did was administer medications, and we only have to pass 1 med on a night shift. The rest of the nights, he'd either sit on his phone or sleep. The guy never cleaned, did paperwork, check on residents, did follow-ups on medications, charted anything, and he even got into heated arguments with caregivers about who would wipe the butt of bedbound residents. To make it worse, the guy took most of my shifts. And he did, you guessed it, the absolute bare minimum on those shifts. So I had to desperately catch up on everything that he let pile up through the week. What normally took maybe 3 hours of work per night suddenly took almost my entire shift. I tried to talk to him multiple times about his lack of work, but it was like talking to a wall. I'd spend 15 minutes begging him to, at the very least, clean the effing kitchen so we don't get ants or mice. And the guy would just nod and he would say, "Yeah, I get it," in the most snarky way possible. Admittedly, I wound up blowing up at him twice, but I feel like it was deserved because he wasn't caring for residents, he wasn't doing his job, and the guy was lying to my face about his work. Everyone, including my boss, knew he was completely useless, but we didn't have enough staff members to fire him. One Saturday, when it was only me as caregiver and Devin as QMAP, I had been called in earlier to work a double shift because we were short-staffed. 30 minutes before shift change, I get a call from my boss saying that Devin quit on the spot. To my understanding, the interaction went as follows. Devin said, "Hey boss, I don't feel like working full-time anymore. I'm changing my schedule to only working 3 days a week now." The boss, of course, says, "You can't just change your schedule without talking to us." That's when Devin says to him, "If you don't give me what I want, then this is my last shift. I quit." So all of a sudden, I was left as the only staff member on shift. I had to do the equivalent of 3 people's jobs. Not to mention, I'd already worked 8 hours on evening shift. It was a long, exhausting night, and I'm pretty sure I only got everything done thanks to a multi-hour-long adrenaline rush and spite. I was once again faced with the fact that I was the only night QMAP, so I'd have to work every single night until we found someone else. However, after a few nights of consistent work, I remembered how effing easy work is when you don't have a mountain of crap to get done due to a useless coworker. All that said, cut to 5 days ago, and I'm having a medical emergency. Without going into too much detail, I got a really bad infection. I wound up in the hospital, and my boss had to cover that night. I came back in the night after, despite feeling like complete ass. Once I got on my shift, my boss calls me with some news. My boss tells me, "Hey, so Devin texted asking for his job back." It turns out Devin quit as a bluff to get what he wanted, and my boss actually went through with it. The guy quit without backup income, and he was facing the consequences of his own actions. My boss asked me if I wanted to let him come back, since I was still sick and I was still the only night QMAP. I weighed my choices, and I came to the conclusion that despite feeling like crap and being forced to work every single night, it was still less exhausting and strenuous than trying to pick up after that useless worker. It was a final, beautiful moment where I got to put the nail in his coffin. The idiot clearly didn't want to work, and in no uncertain terms, he had told our boss that Saturday had been his last day. Who was I to say otherwise? I'm sure I'll get some people asking if he knows it was me. And yes, I texted him separately to inform him. It was a professional but very passive-aggressive text. I said, "Devin, I made the decision with boss to not hire you back. You told me several times that you didn't want to work here and your work ethic reflected this. On top of that, you quit. That's a pretty definitive final statement. Happy travels. Good luck." See, and this is why you should never pull a power move like quitting to try to get what you want, especially if you're a useless worker to begin with. Like, what a bold move that was, right? So boss, I don't want to work all these shifts anymore, so now I will only work 3 days per week, or else I quit. Like, that's the one thing that self-entitled people have over a lot of other people, is the nerve to say stuff like that. But yeah, what a mistake on Devin's part, and the fact that OP shut him down when he practically was begging to come back made things even sweeter. And since we're on the topic of entitled workers trying to push around managers, this person shares a similar experience. So I have a troublesome coworker who thinks she can push the store around. She constantly tries to change her schedule so she can get the hours she wants, even though it makes everything hard for everyone else in the store. Let's call her Stacy. And Stacy has a history of doing this over the past year. Well, this year, Stacy decides to tell the boss that she can't open the store anymore, and that she's only available from 8 a.m. to 3 in the afternoon. Furthermore, she tries to blame other employees for things she doesn't get done. Last year, she decides to cause an issue with another employee, and that employee turned her in for food stamp fraud. To give you a little background, Stacy lives with her boyfriend, and he happens to work for a government contractor, making good money plus overtime. Her boyfriend even went out of the way to buy her a brand new car to go back and forth to work. In this regard, Stacy lied to the social services by not telling them that he lived in that household. After the report was filed, Stacy came into the store to buy groceries. However, she paid in cash, which prompted me to ask her why she didn't use her EBT card. She told me that someone turned her in and that her EBT card was shut off. She then said in order to get benefits back, she moved out and she reapplied for food stamps. Once she was approved and got her benefits back, she broke her lease and she promptly moved back in with her boyfriend. Fast forward to this year, our store was having attendance and cooperation issues. As a result, there was a store meeting where corporate got involved, and every store employee had to be present. During the meeting, they stated that all the applications for the current employees had an availability for any day and any shift. In order to rectify the problems that our store has been having, corporates decided that all employees will get scheduled for different shifts, including opening and closing. Well, little Miss Stacy decided that she didn't like that, and over the weekend, she decides to send a message over Facebook to her direct manager, stating that the schedule had better be changed to suit her availability. Stacy threatened the manager by saying that she's not working nights and she would not be coming in those shifts. I received a phone call from the store manager saying that Stacy called out for her shift today and that I would have to cover it. Keep in mind, I had plans to go out to dinner for my birthday with my parents. While I don't mind the overtime, I'm not happy that I had to cancel my reservations and blow off my family. As a result, I've made a call to social services in my county, and I made a report that Stacy's committing EBT fraud. Moreover, if they check the address they have on file for her, they'll find that she's no longer living there, and that the owner of the property will be available to verify that she broke her lease. This will be the second time that they catch Stacy lying to them about her living situation. Being that this will be more than one instance where she lied to receive benefits, it's very likely that she'll be investigated and charged with welfare fraud. So now, maybe she'll be looking at more days off and spending that time in a cell waiting to be arraigned. Several years ago, I had this coworker who was absolutely worthless. She called in sick at least every other week with some BS excuse. She was always running around, chatting and socializing instead of working, and leaving the rest of us to fill in for her. Another coworker, who I'll refer to as Fed Up, were really sick of dealing with her because we were the ones expected to take her calls and take care of her customers when she was out or away from her desk. I had complained loudly and often to my manager to no avail. For some reason, she took it as if I were challenging her authority, rather than believing I had a legitimate complaint. One day, she basically told me that she was sick of hearing about it, that I obviously had a conflict and to drop it or else. Well, I dropped it, but I was pissed. Finally, one week, everything came to a head. Worthless handled one of our large clients, and we were getting a lot of calls from her customers. So many, in fact, that my supervisor told me and Fed Up that we need to help Worthless because she couldn't possibly handle all the calls. At that, I was livid. Maybe if she spent her time at her desk, instead of running all over the office, she could handle the calls. Anyways, I did what I was told, but I fumed the whole time. Worthless was also in the habit of leaving early every day. At about 20 minutes to closing, she would shut down her computer, and she would go sit with another coworker and blab for 10 minutes. They would then leave together while I was still working. Well, one afternoon after she left, I had about 10 of her unanswered calls, so I sent them back to her desk. I figured if she had time to leave early, she had time to return her own calls. Well, apparently, the next day, she tattles to the boss because she came to see me about the phone calls. At this point, I had it. I told my boss exactly what happened and why I sent the calls back. I guess this time she agreed with me because we didn't have to help her with calls anymore. The whole time this was going on, Worthless was bitching non-stop about this client. She was so pissed about having to take all these phone calls and she griped all the time. Well, she decided to vent on Facebook. And the idiot that she is made disparaging comments about one of our biggest clients online. As if that wasn't bad enough, she was friends with at least 20 coworkers, all of whom saw that rant. Most of them were friends in Facebook name only because in reality, very few people could stand her. So one of her friends screenshots the page and then prints it out and gave it to my coworker. We then mailed the screenshot of her rant to the HR manager from outside the office and we sat back and waited. 2 days later, Worthless was escorted from the office. Rumor has it that HR had her termination paperwork ready before they even called her in. So one of my coworkers is also one of my closest friends. We often joke at work that he's my work husband, which would usually be a big no-no due to office gossip, but the guy's incredibly gay, so no one bats an eyelash. I preface this way for a reason. He's trying to get into reading, and I read a ton. A year ago, I let him borrow my Kindle for a work trip, and I suggested a book I already had, and he absolutely loved it. Just recently, he was traveling again, and he asked if I had suggestions that he would like. Now, the problem is, he doesn't have free time, so he's afraid to start reading a book just to not like it. I had a paperback book I knew he'd like, but I knew he wanted to be able to pull up the Kindle app on his phone, so I just bought the Kindle version of the book, and I shared my library with him. That's when Office Karen heard the conversation we had when he returned, and the following exchange occurred. I said, I knew you would like it. Are you going to get the sequel? My friend said, I already bought it. I'll be driving to the city this weekend, so I want to read it on the drive. This is when Karen chimes in and says, what are you guys talking about? My friend says, oh, she gave me access to her Kindle library when I was on vacation, so we're talking about a book she bought for me to read on there. Karen says, oh, I love to read. Will you share your library with me? I respond, oh, I can just show you what I have and you can see if there's anything you'd like to borrow. I don't have too much on my Kindle. I usually buy physical copies. Karen then looks through the library and she says, oh, you don't have the book I wanted. I respond, yeah, like I said, the library's fairly limited. There's only like 30-ish books on there. Karen then asked, can you look it up on the Amazon store? I replied, you can on your phone, and then you can download the app and read it right there. She then says, I know, but can you look it up? So I look it up, and I tell her it's $7.99. She then says to me, okay, so when you download it, share it with me. I reply, I'm not downloading it. It's not even a book I would want to read. I can show you how to download it on your phone, but I'm not buying this unless you pay me for it. Karen then says, why would I pay you for a book that you get to keep forever? I would just be borrowing this. To which I respond, why would I buy a book that I would never read for someone else? She then says, but you did that for him. I say, no, I bought him a book I actually enjoy. She then says, oh, well, let me look at your library again. Maybe there's something I would enjoy. This is when I tell her, actually, only one person can have access to it at a time. So until my friend finishes all the books he wants to read in there, I can't share it, and he's a slow reader. My friend chimes in and says, yeah, I'm very slow. She then went around the office telling people that I'm cheap and selfish and to not share things with me. Like, seriously. See, that's the thing I really hate. Like, when some people don't get what they want, they then have to trash that person behind their backs. And seriously, I'm willing to bet if OP did shell out the money to buy Karen that book, it would never ever be read. But yeah, Karen logic, right? You bought them something, so buy me something. So this one went from 0 to 100 pretty quickly. First off, some backstory. I own a small business, and our team are absolute rock stars. These are good people who could walk away at any time and land another job in minutes. We survived the pandemic that must not be named with no layoffs, no reduction in pay, and transitioned to 100% work at home, which remains in place. We've worked together for a long time, with the least senior person being with us for 7 years. That said, a friend of my wife, who I'll call Stacy, is a complainer. She's one of those people who aren't happy unless they're not happy. My ever-patient wife, as demonstrated by putting up with me for 30 years, does her best to cheer her up. Last December, Stacy puts in a vacation request for the week of Christmas, a week before Christmas, when everyone else had already put their request in and was approved. Her request was denied, and she thought she would leverage the situation by quitting, only to discover that they processed her voluntary termination after she went home. It's now May, and she's been out of work. She and other friends were visiting last Sunday for one of my wife's wine and crafts nights among her friends. Making small talk in the kitchen, I asked her how her job search was going, and she said it was going poorly, and that's when she asked me for a job. Now, I didn't mind the ask, as you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. However, we're not hiring right now, and I told her as much. She then said to me, "You know I'm a hard worker." I actually don't. Why not fire someone at your company and hire me? It did take me a second to process this before I explained that our staff's been together for almost a decade, and I can't do that. To which she replies, "You're the owner. You can do anything you want." And I just thought to myself, no, because a BS move like that would destroy the trust of the team. I apologize and make a quick exit before the conversation could continue. On Monday, I happened to be on the phone with another small business owner in town, who I'll call Bob, who said he was down a couple of people. I remembered Stacy's request, so I tell Bob what little I know about her work life, and he said to have her call. So I tell my wife, who passed it along to Stacy. Fast forward to today, and Bob calls me. He leads with, "How well do you know Stacy?" I was a little nervous, and not looking to vouch for her, but also not wanting to torpedo her opportunity, I gave the best non-answer answer I could come up with. Bob then burst into laughter, explaining his interview with Stacy. It lasted less than 45 minutes because she kept trying to interview not for the job he had available, but for the other positions he already has filled. I just apologized, and things are okay with Bob and I. But holy crap, did this go south quickly. Okay, that's a new one I've never heard before. So I know I'm here for this position, but I think I'm better suited for other positions. Let me tell you why. Like, oh my goodness, the secondhand embarrassment I get from thinking of that cringy interview. And let me guess, she got absolutely nothing out of that, and she just can't figure out how she keeps ending up in the same bed she made, right? And listen, if I were in OP's shoes, I would totally call her up and ask her how the interview went, so I could hear her side of her BS. Some people are absolutely clueless. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode of the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where workers are getting together to destroy their bad bosses. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.